right, today is March 15th, 2011. This is Emily Carley. I'm here in Madison, Georgia with Mr. Harold L. Moss. That's M-O-S-S. And Mr. Moss, you were in the Army Air Corps, correct?
Yes, that's right.
In the Air Sea Rescue that was attached to the North Atlantic Air Transport Command in Newfoundland.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Well, where are you from originally, Mr. Moss?
Pardon?
Where are you from originally?
Oh, I grew up in Atlanta.
All right, well, tell me how you got into the Army Air Corps.
Well, I wanted to be a pilot, and so in my senior year in high school, I took a test at the post office in Atlanta to see if I could qualify to be a cadet. And I passed that test, and they said, go home now and wait until you're drafted. So I went home and waited for, from about April of one year, 42, to February of 43, when I got a call saying that I would be inducted at Fort McPherson, Georgia, Atlanta.
And so after you were inducted, did you go immediately into training? Did you go immediately into your training after you were inducted?
No, I went to Miami for testing for a week, and then went to Nashville for further testing. And I'm sorry, I went to Davidson College for a quarter after that.
Was that prior to Miami?
That was part of the training.
Prior to Miami or after Nashville?
No, it was Miami a week, and then to the campus of Davidson College. And then after a quarter there, I went to Nashville for further examinations and testing. And that's where I washed out. About half the guys washed out because they had too many people that wanted to be pilots, and the war in Europe was drawing to a close to some extent, and so they just didn't need that many, so they took some and left others out.
Was that a big
It was kind of a letdown. Yeah. But then they told me that I was qualified to fly because I had passed the test for that. So they said, we'll give you a choice. You can be a radio operator and gunner, or engineer and gunner, or a waist gunner. And so I chose radio operator.
And so did you go into more training at that point to be a radio operator?
I went from there to Scottsfield, Illinois, and spent about 24 weeks, I guess, up there.
And after you finished up at Scottsfield, where did they send you from there?
It's near St. Louis, just across about 10 or 12 miles from the river, and across the river right into St. Louis.
After you completed your training there, where did you go?
I went to Yuma, Arizona for gun crew training. And I spent about 8 weeks there. And I don't know whether I'd live through that or not, because when I got off the train, it was 128 degrees in the shade. And I'd never seen weather like that before. But fortunately, it was dry heat, and it was much more pleasant, really, than a lot of the weather in Georgia. They were so humid at times. So I spent my time there, and had a chance to fly in the B-17 and use a twin caliber, 50 caliber gun from the waist of the B-17 and shot at tow targets. They were being towed by another plane, and I understand that WWIIs were some of the pilots of those planes. And so after we finished that training, we were given a 10-day leave, and I went home and then went back to Florida to be assigned to a crew. And while there, I went horseback riding for the first time at the insistence of some of my buddies, and I didn't make it back. The fellow's horse in front of me shied to the right and threw him over the head, and I pulled up and got off, but the horse hadn't quite stopped, and it pulled my knee out to the side, so I had to go in the hospital and have surgery and so forth on my knee, and in a cast up to my hip for about 3 months. So I was assigned to a crew after I got back.
And so you were assigned to this crew, and I mean, were they about to ship overseas, or what was
No, when we were assigned to a crew, we were stationed in Avon Park, Florida, for bomb crew training, and we spent probably 10-12 weeks there, and I had to do certain things with the radio to show proficiency there, and the other guys had their jobs to do in training for going overseas as a crew, bomb crew. And just as we finished our training, we were sitting there waiting for a week or so for something to happen, and they froze everybody right where they were. And there were several bases that had air bomb crew training sites. There was one in Avon Park where we were, one in Dill Field in Tampa, and Drew Field in Tampa, and one at Gulfport. And so we had all of these crews trained and ready to go at about the same time. And so they froze everybody exactly where they were and said that we have no need for any more troops to go to Europe because the war is just about winding down over there. And that was in 1944 in the spring. And then they said that they needed air-sea rescue crews to take a boat and go to one of the bases around the North Atlantic. And they had bases in Newfoundland, Iceland, Greenland, Scotland, the Azores, and all around the basin. And so we were assigned to Newfoundland, and so our crew was flown to Savannah, Georgia, where we picked up a brand new plane. It had about 6 hours on it. And we went from there to Mobile, Alabama, and picked up the boat. And prior to that, we'd had about 3 or 4 weeks of training at Keesler Field in dropping the boat and retrieving it and so forth. and then when we got the boat, we had everything that we needed. I mean, we had all the supplies we needed. We had all of our gear. And by the time we were ready to take off, the plane was really overloaded with that boat underneath. So the pilot told us to hang on, but we were going to keep the plane on the ground as long as he could before lifting off, because there was such a load there, and he was going to take all of the airport runway to make it. So we held our breath the whole time, I think, and finally we took off and just gradually went up. And we were glad to see those trees underneath us instead of coming through the windows.
Well, tell me, the training that you went through to be part of Air Sea Rescue, what all did that involve? I mean, how did you, just kind of explain what Air Sea Rescue does and what the purpose of the boat and what that would have in it.
Oh, okay. The boat was a 33-foot boat, and it was drawn up under the belly of the B-17, right under the bomb bay. They used the same gear, adapted a little bit to take care of the plane, the same one that was used to lift the bombs up into the bomb bay. And so they rigged it up so that the cables could pull the plane up and attach it underneath the fuselage of the plane. And the boat itself had a mast and sails. It had 2 Chrysler engines, inboards, and the deck was above the waterline. And it had every kind of supply that you can imagine, medical supplies, fishing supplies, food, rain gear, everything you can think of to accommodate about 10 people. And so the boat was fully equipped to take care of a crew that was downed in returning from Europe if they needed to. I mean, if they went down and needed a rescue.
How would the boat be released?
It was released by the bombardier, the same way that the bombs were released. They opened the bomb. I mean, they released the boat from the inside of the plane by releasing the cables, and the boat dropped by parachute, and it went down at an angle about like this, and it had 3 parachutes that made it possible for it to go down and hit the water and bounce back. And since it had a floor level in the boat above waterline, the water drained off immediately, and it was available for use. And all of the instructions on how to use the gear that they had aboard was, of course, part of the equipment on the boat. So any crew that got on was saved by this rescue would be able to use anything and everything on the boat.
How high up would the B-17 be when it would drop the boat?
It had to be over 2,000 feet at least in order for the parachutes to deploy. And we practiced when we were in Scott Field with that, and it was nice to see those parachutes open up and see that thing just float down. And then, of course, they had crews out there to pick it up and bring it back for another try.
So after you finally got off the ground there with all your equipment, tell me what happened at that point. Where did you go?
All right, we went to New Hampshire. That was the base for the ATC. And then from there, we went to Newfoundland, to Gander Field, in the middle of the island.
And did you have any problems getting to Newfoundland with all this weight on the plane or anything?
No,
Was it
no
pretty
problem after that. We knew we had to take all the runway, and our pilot was a conservative pilot, and I was thankful for that. He didn't take any chances. He made sure that everything was ready to go and that he was on top of the situation always.
And before we got started, you were telling me a little bit of the history of Gander in Newfoundland. Can you tell me?
History of what?
Of Gander. You were just telling me a little bit of the background of how that
Oh, yeah.
base came to be.
Canada, Newfoundland is a part of Canada. And the island is off the northeastern coast of the United States, probably 500 miles or so. And the island had several towns around, but they were very small. And this base in the middle of the island, Gander, was a former German airport, and they controlled that island for a number of years. But when the Nazis were beginning to get into the thick of fighting everywhere else, they had to give up the island because they couldn't defend it that close to the United States. So they left everything intact just as it was. So the old hangars that they had there were German-made hangars, and everything else was, I think, probably put up by our own people, the barracks and that kind of thing. And on one half of the base, the Canadians had crews, and on the other half, the U.S. had crews. And so we stayed there for probably 10, 12 weeks or so. And then we moved to Stevensville, which is on the southwestern coast of Newfoundland.
Well, what were you doing in the 10 to 12 weeks that you were at Gander? What was the kind of a daily routine for you there?
With the weather or?
The daily routine.
Oh, the
What were you
daily
doing?
routine. Well, we were attached to the outfit, but we were not a part of it. So it was kind of a stepchild sort of situation, really, because we didn't have any specific responsibilities other than being on call 24 hours a day in case we were needed. And of course, making our exercise flights just to keep in trim, to be up to date on what we needed to do. And we were fortunate enough not to have had but one call that a plane was down, and it was between the Azores and Newfoundland, so they called a plane from each. We had two planes in our outfit in Newfoundland. And I think probably there were 2 in the Azores. So one from each base was called on this flight. And so we took off and went down to the last spotted place that the crew was calling from, indicating they were down. And then we flew a pattern, kind of a concentric square pattern out from the center, enlarging that square each time around. And the other crew did the same thing south of us, or east of us, I guess. And their crew saw the remains of the ship that went down and the crews floating, so they were the ones who dropped the boat. We went back home with our boat. But nevertheless, it was pretty exciting just to be a part of trying to help somebody in need.
How would you look for people or downed crews when you were that high up? I mean, what kind of equipment would you use to be able to locate them? I mean, would you have somebody that was using?
They had radar equipment, of course, and in sight mostly. So we were flying a pattern that was, probably 3,000 to 4,000 or 5,000 feet, no more than that, so that we were able to see something on the surface down below. And we had a pretty good, it was a pretty good clear day, so we had a good shot at rescuing the crew. And they were rescued, as I said.
And so how close would you drop the boat to a crew that was down? I mean, what was kind of the area? I mean, because I know you would probably not want to drop it too close to them for fear of, where it might land. So how would you determine that?
We tried to drop it upwind if possible, and far enough away so that we felt that the parachute drop would be complete before it got to where they were, and the boat would drift toward them. And of course they had to make their own way into the boat, but they were willing to do that.
And so they would just wait in this boat until, I guess, another boat came to rescue them or something like that? I mean, they would just kind of wait until another rescue attempt, till a rescue attempt could be made for them then?
Yeah, they had compasses and things of that kind, and maps and that, everything they would need. So all they needed to do was crank up. But probably they used the sails most of the time because a limited amount of gas was available for the engines. But for emergency conditions, high seas, when they needed to keep the boat headed into the waves and that kind of thing, they could use the motor to control the boat a little better than the sails.
And so on that particular mission, did you see the downed crew, or had the other plane gotten there before you even located them or saw them?
We got a message from the Azores, I believe, or from the crew, I've forgotten which, probably the Azores, and they reported that the other crew had found the crew, and so we just returned to our base.
And that was when you were stationed at Gander that you got?
No, that was Stevensville.
Oh, okay, that was at Stevens.
Mm-hmm.
So when you were at Gander, you said you were doing the practice flights and things like that to keep up to date on what was going on, and then just waiting for,
That
a
was
call. Okay. And so then you moved to Stevensville after that 10 to 12
right.
weeks. And where was that located in Newfoundland?
It's in the southwestern corner.
Okay.
Yeah. They had they had, in addition to the air sea rescue outfit that we were using, boat, there was another air sea rescue outfit there that had a team of dogs that were dropped by parachute. And they flew in a PBY, which has a big blister-like window on each side. And it could open those windows, and the dogs were rigged with parachutes, and they had a sled, and they had a doctor, and the doctor and the crew of dogs and the sled were dropped by parachute for people in the middle of the island who had medical problems or something and they couldn't get out, because the only transportation in the island was a train that went around the periphery of the island along the coast. And so anyone who was 200 or 300 miles inland had to have some way of getting to the coast to get medical help and get to a hospital. So this crew, the crew was stationed there with us, and the dogs just loved to be out pulling a car or a truck. We had a semi, a big dual wheel truck that carried troops and different things of that kind, cargo. And they would put the dog team on the front of that thing and let them pull it around the base. And they just barked and they had a great time pulling the truck around. It was good exercise for them. And they invited us over for a welcoming dinner when we first got there, and it was a nice occasion.
Did you ever see the dog's parachute?
Never did drop by parachute, thankfully. I don't know whether I'd had the stomach for it or not, but I guess I would have if I needed to.
What about the dogs? Did you see the dog's parachute at all?
No.
I was
But they
curious
did.
what that might
They
look
did take them on, parachute jumps, just for training and for keeping in trim, ready to go in case they needed it. But we saw them at the kennels, and of course, like I said, we spent the 4th of July, it was, with them, and went out on the lake, and it was just freezing cold. I never thought I'd see a cold July 4th like that.
And so why had they moved you from Gander to Stevensville?
I think, I really am not sure, but I think probably they were closing down the base at at Gander, because the base at Stevensville was much more modern, and the one that was there in Gander was one that was left over, really, from the German occupation, and they didn't. Well, it was just old and outdated, and I'm not sure other than that why.
Well, how long were you at Stevensville?
From probably 3 months after we got there, probably I'd say about 8 months, 8 or 9 months there. I was in Newfoundland about a year and a half. And about 3 months, I guess, maybe 3 months in Gander, and then on the rest of the time in Stevensville.
And were you doing the same thing at Stevensville that you were doing at Gander?
Well, we worked at the air base, doing things like checking the runways for snow and ice and that kind of thing. It snowed practically every day, and it would freeze at night and leave a layer of ice, and then the next day it would snow again and put another layer on. And one night I was out checking the runways in a Jeep, and I was riding along, and there wasn't any light to speak of because they didn't want the island. They didn't want lights, of course, and so we had lights that would give you a little bit of light, but not much. And I was going out across to check one of the runways, and all of a sudden the whole Jeep went down about 15 and 16 inches or so. Just dropped. What a sudden drop that was. I was really shocked. And of course, I let somebody know, and they came out and got me out, pulled the Jeep out. But I'd have been stuck there from now on, I guess.
And any question about Stevensville? Oh, what kind of gear did you have then because of this weather? What kind of clothing were you issued?
We had a flight jacket that was lined and had a fur collar, and we had a cap that had wings on it to pull around the ears, and we were pretty comfortable. Yeah.
Okay, so you were in Stevensville until after the war ended then?
No, until, let's see, February of 46. I went in February the 7th of 43, and I got out February the 13th, 46. Okay. And so I went from there back to the States. I went to D.C. first, and then from there to Atlanta.
All right, and did you stay in the service at all after World War II? Or
No, I was invited to, but I think I had had enough at that point. Although I was very, very fortunate not to have ever had to shoot at anyone, nor be shot at. And it was not my choice, it was just the breaks. And I'm very thankful for that, because I had friends who were in some of the worst battles that we've ever had. The Battle of the Bulge and Okinawa and a lot of the places around the world where they suffered and died. And I was just thankful that I didn't have to face that. Although I was trained and I was ready to go, and we just happened to hit it so that they were cutting down on the people being moved from one place to another.
And I wanted to go back to the beginning too. You talked about that you spent some time at Davidson College.
Yeah.
What were you doing there?
We were taking a course in geography and mathematics and things of that type that would be helpful to us in our flight training. And this was prior to the time I washed out, so this was in anticipation of going into flight training and navigation and that type thing was what we were doing at the college. We also had an opportunity to have 10 hours of flight training in a Piper Cub. Davidson is about 16 miles north of Charlotte. So one day a week we went down to Charlotte and had a flight, had 10 hours, an hour a week in a Piper Cub, and that was quite interesting. And talking about flying by the seat of your pants, you really are. It's quite a different feeling from being in a big plane that you know can't take off, but it does.
And for the B-17s and the boats that you had under there, so if you happened to be called out to drop one of these boats for a crew, would they just have these kind of boats ready to go back in Newfoundland, and you would just get a new one and be ready from there?
We didn't have a spare, but there were 2 crews. So all we had to do, if we needed to, was to fly back and get another one. And probably we would have gone back to Mobile, Alabama. I think that's where they were made, or somewhere along there, Pascagoula or somewhere in the Gulf area.
That's what I was wondering, because I know you had taken it over there, so I didn't know if they had extras over there, if you would have had to come back. Okay.
No,
so each plane had their own, and then you'd get one from the other plane if you needed to, but other than that, you were
That's right.
out. Okay. Besides the dogs that they were also training to parachute, and then your group, were there any other types of rescue groups that were based there that you recall?
Were there any
other types of rescue teams that were based there?
No, just the dog team and the air sea rescue by boat. Those were the only 2.
All right. Well, are there any other things that you recall from your time in Newfoundland that stand out to you? Maybe even some kind of funny stories or anything?
Well, we had a few days off after being there for 6 months or so. And we'd heard about this train that went around the island, and we decided that would be an interesting trip to take. So we went from Stevensville on the southwest coast to a little town on the southeast coast, probably 60 or 80 miles. And we really wanted to just see some of the island, and we just wanted to get away from the base for a while. So 3 or 4 of us went over there, and one thing we were short of was milk, whole milk. We had powdered milk, and sometimes we could get it. We had some friends who were pilots, and they were ferrying people, GIs, back from Europe, and they came through on a regular basis. They flew over and loaded up and came back. And so we asked them if they would bring us a can of milk. I'm talking about the 20-gallon cans, And they said, yeah, they'd put one on board. So they brought us a 20-gallon can of milk. And so we ate and drank all we could and shared it with our friends and so forth. We made good use of it. And so when we went over to this little town on the East Coast, we ordered milk along with our meal. And we ordered a quart each. Well, what we didn't realize was that was an English quart, which means it's about 1 1/5 quarts. And so we had more milk than we could drink. But the lady in the motel there, a little more like a bed and breakfast sort of deal. She said, "Now I want you to try some of my bean soup." And we said, "Well, maybe not." And she said, "Oh, I insist. I want you to try it. I think you'll like it." So we wanted to be nice, and we said, "All right." So she brought this bean soup out, split pea soup, I guess you'd call it. And honestly, it was the best I have ever eaten. It was really delicious. She had been making it for years, and she knew what she was doing. And we enjoyed that as much as the other part of the meal, or more. It was a real treat. So then we got on the train in a day or so and came back to the base and went on with our routine.
In Newfoundland, I mean, you said there were some towns and things like that, obviously you went to some, but was it did it have a pretty small population in general, though, of people that actually lived?
There were only a few, what you'd call densely or densely populated areas, these little towns along the coast, and the one in the central part of the island, and not very many other than along the coast. And those that were inland, like I said, were pretty much isolated, and we didn't see them. I don't know whether you want this or not, but the people had a terrible time. I think that there was a deficiency of calcium in their diet, and most of them had bad teeth. False teeth by the time they were 30. And once in a while you'd see a guy sitting down on the curb somewhere with his knife, scraping around on his teeth and his plate. And we found out that they ordered them from Sears Roebuck catalog from Canada, and they mailed them out. They would make an impression themselves and send it in, and then they would make the plate based on that. Sometimes it didn't quite fit, so they had to get there and scrape those things off and kind of make it custom fitted. It was a bad thing, but it was just that was the case. But the people were friendly, and just really likable people. You wouldn't know them from your neighbor here.
All right, well, are there any other stories that we didn't cover that you recall from your time in the service that you want to talk about?
I don't think so. I don't know. Any questions?
I was going to see, Rod, did you have any?
I was just curious about the landings with the boat on the bottom.
The what?
When you would land the B-17 coming in with the boat still attached,
Yes.
did that present any problems for you?
No. The boat was, as I said, pulled up by cables, and the cables were pretty strong, and it was, I think there was a kind of a cushion fit around the fuselage of the boat. And it was made to the contour of the boat, the plane, so that it would fit snugly. And they drew it up pretty tight, and it held on pretty good. And of course, the wheels were free to, go down, and they had no problem with that. It was just an extra load, and the pilots had to be on the toes to know what they needed to do to correct for, any change.
All right, well, I want to thank you so so much, Mr. Moss, for coming in here today and
You're
sharing
certainly welcome.
your story with us. It was very interesting. I've never interviewed anybody that did air sea rescue, and it's very fascinating to hear how all that worked. So thank you so much for coming in, and thank you for your service to the country. We certainly appreciate it, and appreciate your participation with Witness to War.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.